Hallo zusammen! As many of you may know, I've been making Rammstein related videos for many years now. More specifically, it's over 80 different videos with me talking about Rammstein lyrics, translating them from German to English, analyzing them linguistically for language learners, for instance, or just for Rammstein fans in general. But I've not only made those kinds of videos about Rammstein, I've also made periphery type of videos about the band. And of course, I don't know for sure, but I am pretty sure that many of you guys may not actually know about those videos yet, but you may be very well interested in them. And that is why I came up with the idea to make a compilation video. And this compilation deals with those types of videos, including a little pronunciation guide of the band name, for instance, Till Lindemann's biography before Rammstein, and the same for Richard Kruspe, one of the biggest influences on the band early on, OOMPH, another German metal band that you may not really know about yet, and also frequently asked questions answered by a German. Well, that's me. Hi. So feel free to grab yourself a coffee, a tea, cookies, a cake, I don't know, take a bath watching this, maybe lie in bed and just have a great time, I guess. And of course, you can also find timestamps to the different video chapters in the video description down below. And with that being said, enjoy watching. Hallo zusammen! Fellow Germans might be wondering, why is he making this video? Because it's obvious how to pronounce this band name. To be honest, I'm afraid it isn't. I've heard numerous variations of English pronunciations of this band name and different versions of it, and it is interesting to say the least. And while I was conceptualizing this video and wrote my script here, I noticed that, you know what? There's actually much that can be said about this band name in specific, and also about the German language in general, at least parts of it, how it works, because all of that is also somewhat featured in this band's name. So let's talk about it today and how to verbalize it correctly. And by the way, this video isn't about the origin of the band's name, the German town and military airbase Rammstein with one M and the related airshow accident in 1988 and all that, which is also interesting of course, but this one simply focuses on the linguistic side of it, the linguistic aspects, grammatical things, verbalization of letters, etc. And actually, talking about these things, the band's name is a good example of one of the most common German grammatical tools to create words, nouns, adjectives, you name them. Compound words, combining single words to one new word, usually with a combined new semantic meaning. In the case of Rammstein, the first part or prefix syllable is Ramm. As a noun, this term doesn't exist like that on its own, it's rather derived from the verb rammen, to ram, to drive against something, to hit or to crash. But of course, you could also nominalize this term to das Rammen, the hitting or crashing. The second part is a common German masculine noun, der Stein, singular, die Steine, plural, the stone. So combined it would be the hit stone or crash stone. This could very well relate to cornerstones or other types of stones functioning in a protective way, similar to pillars that are installed to slow down cars or vehicles and immediately stop overly fast ones to prevent accidents and the like. Some interesting trivia for all you guys loving the German language and what makes it great. Even though it's not a compound term that gets used in everyday German, Germans can still immediately say, okay, it's a masculine noun and it has to feature the article der. In Determinativkomposita, the terminating compound words, so to speak, which are the vast majority of compound words in German, the grammatical gender of the last part determines the grammatical gender for the whole compound word. So, since it's der Stein, a masculine noun, der is the masculine article here, the whole compound word Rammstein would be a masculine noun as well. Looking at the pronunciation, the verbalization of the different components of the band name, let's learn about some basic linguistic German features that can be found in the band name too, which actually make this band name a great German lesson on its own. The first one is the common standard German R, which in standard or high German, meaning non-dialectal German, doesn't get trilled the way Till does it in Rammstein songs. More about that though in a different video I've done, which can be found in the end card. There are three types of R sounds in German. So what I'm going to talk about now is the common R in standard or high German as opposed to dialectal German. Please keep that in mind. The most common and standard German type of R is the R. a rather non-shrilled, non-rolled, slightly throaty type of R, Rammstein. Some fixed endings of terms, suffixes that end in R, might be verbalized way differently though. For instance, in a noun like der Lehrer, the teacher. As you might have noticed, the suffix R, E, R rather gets verbalized like an A type of sound, der Lehrer. That's pretty much typical for German words with this suffix. What you might also have noticed is that the A in Ramm is rather short. That has to do with it being right in front of a double consonant, the two M. Now, when you have a vowel that's directly followed by a double consonant in German words, that vowel almost always gets verbalized short. So it's not Rammstein, but it's Rammstein. It's a little bit similar to the usual verbalization of the English to strum, Rammstein, to strum. And by the way, the aforementioned noun, der Lehrer, features the exact opposite to the double consonant rule, a prolonging, stressing H, which leads to the E in the first syllable of Lehrer to be pronounced long, Lehrer, not Lehrer. But continuing with Rammstein, the fixed consonant combination ST can be very tricky for learners, similar to SP, by the way, that combination. Because even though it looks quite obvious and simple, ST equals st or SP equals sp. Well, that's usually not what this consonant combination gets verbalized like. In these combinations, the S gets verbalized like a sh combination, SCH, SCH, similar to the English SH, sh. That's why it's not Stein, even though people from Hamburg might disagree here because of the dialectal form here, it's rather Stein. The fixed vowel combination EE, being a diphthong, can be equally tricky, I guess. Even though it contains the German E, it gets verbalized as an A sound in this combination. So it's not Stein, but Stein. It's basically similar to the English term shine with an additional T added in there, Stein. And when you have a term that features more than one syllable, like this one for instance, which features two, you also need to know which syllable gets stressed. And in this case, Rammstein. The stressing clearly lies on the first syllable, Ramm, Rammstein, not Rammstein. So if I were to find some, well, proofs or hints on why Till Lindemann sounds the way he sounds when he sings, I would probably start looking at his origin, where he's from, and what kind of German people speak there. So let's do that. Till Lindemann was born in Leipzig on January the 4th in 1963. Leipzig is a pretty big and well-known city in the state Saxony, which is one of 16 German states that are part of the Federal Republic of Germany. In short, Germany. Now, we could check out what natives living in that eastern part of Germany sound like when they speak German, and in fact, this dialect we commonly know as Sächsisch is a comparatively distinct way of speaking German. Maybe that actually will tell us more. The linguistic way of this way of speaking German is Obersächsischer Dialekt, and apart from Saxony, Sachsen, it's also spoken in the states of Thüringen, Thuringia, and Sachsen-Anhalt, Saxony-Anhalt, all located in the middle east part of Germany. However, nowadays, this way of speaking can rather be referred to as a colloquial regiolect, since definition-wise, a dialect is pretty much an individual linguistic variant with own words and expressions you wouldn't find in standard German or in other German dialects. And apart from that, the outer lines or the linguistic periphery of dialects and where they are commonly spoken are pretty much blurred nowadays anyway. And while all of this is good to know, and I guess quite interesting to you guys as well, because I guess you also watch my videos because you're interested in German and learning German, in the case of Till Lindemann and finding out why he sounds the way he sounds when he sings, this doesn't really matter too much. Not only because you don't have that rolled R sound in the Saxonian way of speaking, but also because he was raised in another German state way up in the northeast of Germany called Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, Mecklenburg-West Pomerania. These days it's common to speak standard colloquial German there for many people, but there are also some dialects which are especially common in those certain regions. A good example is Ostniederdeutsch, a variant of Niederdeutsch, Low German, which a couple of decades and centuries ago was spoken regularly, especially in the upper parts of Germany, and could also be identified as an own linguistic system next to High German, at least depending on which linguist you might ask. And there have been different forms and variations of Niederdeutsch as well, so it's not just one single dialect in that sense. And as a side note, if you look at a Low German word like Apfel, this strongly reminds of the English apple, so Low German is actually more commonly, while not associated with English, but sort of similar, at least regarding some expressions and words. Some natives living in Mecklenburg-West Pomerania might also speak the Berlin dialect, or rather little dialects, and a mixture of those and Standard German there. However, as well, linguistically logical that approach is to look at his origin, his dialect, and what they speak there, meaning the Germans that live in that region, that doesn't really help us in this case. So I suggest that we should change the perspective. Now that we know this isn't related to Till's very own dialect and where he's from, where could this rolled R, especially that one, really come from? What could be the origins of that R sound in German? There are many German dialects, and some have remained more commonly spoken and basically alive than others, who gave and give way to Standard German more and more. The most common and obvious example for a distinct R sound in a German dialect is the Bavarian dialect. Technically, it's not just one distinct dialect, but rather a group of dialects that are spoken in Bayern, Bavaria in the south of Germany, in the majority of Österreich, Austria, some territories in Czechien, the Czech Republic, Italien, Italy, Ungarn, Hungary, and die Schweiz, the Swiss Republic. When these people speak German, they tend to roll the R in a very expressive way.
Ich glaub, dir brennt der Hut.
Respectively, they stress the consonant R in spoken German, which mainly has to do with how they verbalize and intonate vowels right before the R. Let's take a look at the word der Markt, singular, the market. Der Markt would be the standard way of verbalizing that term in Standard German. Whereas in Northern Germany, people would tend to stress the A, meaning to prolong the vowel A in that case, people in Bavaria and in the other just mentioned regions rather tend to verbalize it very briefly and shortly. So in Northern German it could sound like Markt, whereas in Southern German it could be Markt. Something like that. Maybe you already know about this, but a common reason why Till Lindemann's singing voice and the overall gesture and appearance of Rammstein keep being associated with the likes of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich is that we all have heard some Hitler speeches in school and elsewhere, and Hitler was born in Austria, yet lived in Munich, München, the capital city of Bayern, for quite a while. Especially in public propaganda speeches, he sounded very distinct, loudly up front, and wanted to grab the attention of everyone listening that way. He sort of had a tendency to stress and over-articulate certain elements, which also gave an impression of a harsh-sounding German language. As a native speaker, I suppose foreigners who have only heard about the German language and don't know too much about it might associate the basic sound of it with that harsh intonation, which isn't typical for the vast majority of German dialects or even Standard German at all though. So even though I see and get why people think that Till sounds so harsh and Hitler-like, I think it's a prominent ingredient of Rammstein's everlasting love of provoking people at the end of the day. I mean, if you followed their career, they have done that multiple times, for instance by using snippets of a Leni Riefenstahl propaganda video for the Depeche Mode cover Stripped, which according to the band and management was chosen out of aesthetic reasons. It shows naked athletes, and they didn't choose that because they wanted to pay a tribute to the Third Reich ideology or the Riefenstahl propaganda. We're talking about Rammstein at the end of the day. This all works as a way of provoking and getting attention. I also state this because this intended provocation isn't the only potential reason why Till sounds the way he sounds when he sings. As you might have noticed, I've specifically talked about Till's singing voice, and I did that on purpose. When you hear Till Lindemann giving interviews, which is a rare occasion, you'll immediately notice that he doesn't roll the R there at all.
Gestenreiches Zwiegespräch da führen kann irgendwie und ein bisschen acten, irgendwie keine Ahnung. Das Aber ansonsten gucke ich da nicht so. Ich suche mir so einen Punkt irgendwo hinten.
And there are quite a few Rammstein songs where he doesn't roll the R even once either. A good example would be Ohne dich on Reise Reise. I guess here he doesn't use that phonetic style or figure, since, judging from Till's standards, he sings rather high and the rather harsh sounding approach might not fit the theme of the song for the most part either. A good example for not using the rolled R sound here is the chorus line. Mit dir bin ich auch allein. With you I'm still alone.
In the typical Rammstein style it would sound like this. Mit dir bin ich auch allein.
Of sorts. This once again shows that this intonation doesn't necessarily have anything to do with his dialect or the way he has learned to speak German. Here it rather reminds of a specific type of consciously speaking or singing German, the so-called Bühnendeutsch or Kunstdeutsch, stage German that is. Nope, these aren't dialects but rather German intonations and verbalizations that have been and are common in theater plays and opera. It's basically an artificial way of verbalizing and stressing the consonant R in German in the sense of not being based around a dialect the actors or singers really speak themselves natively. It's basically a stylistic device for strengthening and underlining the meaning and the sound of statements and sentences in a theater play by being very expressive with the intonation of consonants in contrast to the vowels. Most modern plays might not feature that as often anymore, maybe also because the acoustics are better these days, but it was a pretty common thing back in the day. Here's a little example of a modern play of Die Räuber by Friedrich Schiller, which he wrote in 1781, long time ago, and here you can actually hear a little snippet, a little bit of a rolled R. It's a little snippet with sort of a vintage filter over the soundtrack, in the literal sense of the word, and that's why it sounds, well, quite classy and old-fashioned.
Oh, ihr Mächte des Himmels, entlastet mich dieser tödlichen Wollust.
And when I think about it, it actually makes sense, because the lower you sing, the more certain consonants and sounds might probably sound blurry or get dropped in a phonetic sense. So yeah, it might be a good idea to overemphasize on them and over-expressing them by using something like that rolled R sound. So summing things up, this stylistic approach, meaning the rolled R in particular, works from both a German and a foreign perspective, because it reminds of certain dialects and historic German figures, even though the rolled R in this case is not related to those dialects, and because of this reference to German figures and it makes you think of that, this works as a provocative aspect. It makes the consonants sound more distinct, especially when singing in a low register. It generally sounds very expressive and phonetically interesting, also for foreign ears. It lifts the vocal melody and the vocal line from the loud instrumentation and gives it a very own character. It has what we Germans call a huge Wiedererkennungswert, a recognition factor or recognition value, and in that sense it distincts Rammstein from most other bands, German and non-German. And last but not least, it might also make people think of a classic quality to the music if they are aware of that classic stage German sound. Till wasn't the very first of the Lindemann family to be sort of well known. His father, Werner Lindemann, basically laid the foundation of what Till's later occupation should become: a lyricist, a poet and a writer. That's exactly what his father was, and more specifically, he became popular by writing Kinderbücher, children's books in the 1970s. Before that, he had written many poems for adults with serious topics. Even though his dad could be seen as a direct influence on his later activities, being a lyricist and poet, they went through many ups and especially downs throughout the years, which can be read about in Werner Lindemann's book Tim, first published in 1988. And as we know now, he actually died before Rammstein actually became a band, and more than that, a thing. But let's jump back in time first and let's look at the early years of Till Lindemann. His mother, Brigitte Lindemann, was a German journalist who worked for the Norddeutscher Rundfunk, one of a few different German public broadcasting companies, for many years. Till also has a 6 years younger sister, Saskia. At 11 years old, he joined a sports school, and from 1977 to 1980 he went to an Internat, a boarding school. It was also around the time that Till started to write his own poems. Many years later, he once referred to writing poems as a fun activity since he does it for himself. Writing lyrics, though, is pretty hard for him in comparison. Aged 12 in 1975, his parents got divorced and lived separately from each other. In his teens, he had developed a strong passion for swimming and was what Germans would call a Leistungsschwimmer, a competitive swimmer, which almost might have started a whole different career for him. After having had first victories in the field of swimming, he even was supposed to swim for the GDR at the 1980 Olympic Summer Games in Russia, but eventually he was forbidden to take part. After having placed second at the Florence Junior Swimming European Cup in 1978, he had sneaked out of the hotel room and got himself porno magazines from the Federal Republic of Germany, the so-called Klassenfeind, the class enemy or enemy of the people. Being a GDR citizen, leaving the hotel was pretty much equal to Staatsverrat or Landesverrat, treason. Now you might be wondering, why? Isn't he German? What is going on? Yes, of course, he is German, but from 1949 to 1990, two Germanys existed. West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, a capitalist democracy, and East Germany, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, a socialist/communist state. Till was born in Leipzig, a big city in Saxony, and by the time of his birth in 1963, the wall had already been built, which both physically but also mentally separated both Germanies and ideologies even more. You can find out more about this part of German history in my related video, by the way. But even though he was born in Saxony, he grew up in Wendisch-Rambo, a district of the small town Bad Kleinen in the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which also belonged to the former GDR, so he was also a citizen of the GDR. Since both Germanys actually were based on different ideologies and political systems and structures, well, there was sort of an ongoing mental fight in a way, especially on the government level of things, but also, well, sadly in some cases a physical fight. For instance, when people wanted to flee out of the GDR and into West Germany or another country. In 1979, he had to end his swimming career because of an injury early on. In a positive way, maybe German fans of Rammstein might think, gerade noch mal Glück gehabt, just saved by the bell in a way, because if he hadn't had that injury, he might have taken a whole different career path, who knows. He then moved on to work as a Torfstecher, a peat cutter, but that only lasted for 3 days when he got fired. In 1981, aged 17, he refused to take part in the 18-month-long military service, which was mandatory at the time, and almost got arrested as a result. Till continued to work as a Techniker, a technician, as a Zimmermann, a carpenter, or for instance as a Korbmacher, a basket weaver. Musically, he didn't start singing but playing drums in the fun punk rock band First Arsch in the mid to late 1980s, where he also would play some bass and sometimes he even sang a few encores. Roughly around the same time in 1985, his first daughter Till Lindemann was born. I haven't really found anything specific about the mother, but according to my research, they married shortly after Nele was born and got divorced soon afterwards. That was also the time frame when he first met Flake and Paul, who at the time were playing in the band Feeling B and gave a concert in Hohenficheln, a parish in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, where Till had lived at that point. After having moved away from his dad, he had moved into an acquaintance of his. Led by a mutual friend of theirs, Flake and Paul went to their house after the concert. They partied all night long without really noticing Till as one of the residents all too much though. This changed in the course of the following weeks when they paid them a regular visit and got to know Till better as well. At one point, Till introduced them to Richard, who would also later become a member of Rammstein, and back in the day he was known as Sven. In 1992, First Arsch released their first and only album Saddle Up, where both Landers and Kruspe would also participate in. In 1993, his second daughter Marie-Louise was born as well. By this time, Till was again married, now to Anja Köseling, but they got divorced a few years later. I guess one of the biggest and maybe the final inspiration for starting a metal band was the USA trip of Till, Kruspe and his, at the time, roommate Oliver Riedel in 1993, which made them especially excited and curious about this kind of music. Heavily inspired by that trip, Richard Kruspe wanted to start a new band with Oliver Riedel, who had also played bass in the band The Instaboctables before, and Christoph Schneider. He directly had Till Lindemann as the singer in mind, and he managed to persuade him to join the band. After Paul Landers and Flake had joined, they began playing as the Temple Prayers in 1994, which then would turn to Rammstein Flugschau and eventually to Rammstein. Rumor has it that back then it was Till's main influence that Paul Landers and Flake Lorenz could also join the band in the first place, since he was a big fan of Feeling B and they were quite known in the scene at the time. Yeah, and the rest is history, I guess. To me, stories like these really show that, well, sometimes life just happens and you can't plan it. For instance, as John Lennon also said, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans, and that is totally true. Sometimes, things happen, whether it's an injury or you meet someone and then you take a whole different path, which I think is really, really cool and fascinating. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you didn't know most of these things. Maybe you have learned something new. I don't know. I surely did learn some new things that I didn't know before. I knew a few things. For instance, I knew that his father was a poet and a writer, and a very popular one in the GDR back in the day. And I knew also that he was a swimmer. But yeah, there is much more to Till Lindemann, even nowadays, than, well, sort of meets the eye of the yellow press at times, and maybe even some Rammstein fans, but I don't know. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to let me know by leaving a like and by sharing this with other people that you know that also know Rammstein, Till Lindemann, and that are interested in them. That would make my whole day. Thank you very much for doing that, and thanks for watching. I'm your Vlog Dave. Tschüss und bis zum nächsten Mal. Hallo zusammen. Arguably, the band Rammstein is very popular and very successful internationally, but their identity is still based around the German language and culture. And I'm sure many of you guys know quite a lot about the band already, but there are some things you might not know all too well about Rammstein and what they are actually about. So let's find out more about them and what is pretty special about their lyrics, songs, and whatever. Let's talk about 5 facts about Rammstein today. Fact number 1. Rammstein was named after a big accident in Germany. Yes. In the state of Rhineland-Palatinate, Rhineland-Pfalz, which actually is one of 16 German states, the United States Air Force has an airbase. This airbase is both located in and called Rammstein with just one M. In 1988, around 6 years prior to the formation of the band Rammstein in 1994, an accident happened there during a Flugschau, an air show. In specific, 3 stunt pilots collided with their planes in mid-air. In the course of this accident, over 70 people died and more than 1,000 people were injured. Guitarist Paul Landers, drummer Christoph Schneider, and keyboarder Flake Lorenz actually said that they came up with the name Rammstein out of Quatsch. Yeah. And according to a statement by Paul Landers, they couldn't really manage to get rid of it later on. Landers also states that the reason why they spelled themselves Rammstein with 2 M instead of 1 M is that they simply didn't know the town Rammstein is spelled with just 1 M. So yeah, there you go. Now that I think about it, and that's just my assumption of course, maybe they've subconsciously associated the name with the common German verb rammen, to ram or to drive against something, and assumed the town would be spelled with 2 M as well, which would also cynically fit the aforementioned situation. In fact, at first they actually called themselves Rammstein Flugschau, Rammstein Airshow, before shortening the name to Rammstein. The part Stein translates to stone, by the way. So in a way, a literal equivalent to the band name could be Ramstone. Fact number 2. A very prominent trademark element in Till Lindemann's vocals is actually fake. And please don't get me wrong here, I don't mean that in a negative way. I just want and need to point out that Till's dialect doesn't feature such a strong, prominent and rolled R sound you can hear in most Rammstein songs. It's fake in this particular context, and when you think about it, in fact a few songs by the 6 guys don't even feature that rolled R. A good example would be the ballad Ohne dich, Without You. Of course it includes words that contain a German R, the er, but Till doesn't roll it here, he actually verbalizes it in a completely ordinary and unseeming manner. The chorus goes:
Ohne dich kann ich nicht sein, ohne dich. Mit dir bin ich auch allein, ohne dich.
If Till sang this the way he sings most other Rammstein songs, it would rather sound like
Mit dir bin ich auch allein.
So there is not dir, but dir. This rolled and prominent R is used by many native Bavarians, for instance, people from Bayern in southern Germany. It's also pretty much the basic R sound you get to hear in regions such as Switzerland, Austria and South Tyrol. But why does Till like to use this seemingly Teutonic sound though? It obviously puts a high emphasis on what's being sung. It basically is sort of an independent rhythmical figure on its own, which adds another layer to the melody, and more importantly, it also works as a trademark sound for the band, because pretty much all other internationally known bands from Germany that also sing in German have a comparatively standard way of verbalizing things. And again, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. In addition to all these plausible reasons, Till's way of singing and pronouncing words when he sings is sort of related to Bühnendeutsch, stage German so to speak, which is a specific way of verbalizing words and sentences in some theater plays and the like. Many people, and to be quite frank with you, especially the ones that don't look any further than the next corner, seem to think that this pronunciation is meant as a glorification of the Third Reich and the way Adolf Hitler spoke. And while it certainly works as a form of provocation, which in turn leads to attention, at the end of the day many things are marketing related, let's be honest here, the guys in Rammstein couldn't be farther away from any right-wing political ideologies. In fact, they even made a song about this misconception. Links 2, 3, 4, left 2, 3, 4. Fact number 3. While many Rammstein songs actually remain pretty vague and, well, mysterious in a way, some others are more explicit and way more direct in terms of their inspiration. And when I actually think of the latter category, meaning songs that are directly inspired by an incident that happened at some point in time, I immediately think of Mein Teil. And that sounds just slightly ambiguous and sexually connotated. Mein Teil, my thing. This song is about Armin Maivis, also known as der Kannibale von Rothenburg, and yes, it's the guy who killed his lover, slaughtered him, and partially ate him as well, in order to make his lover a part of himself. The song obviously remains more or less vague if you don't know the lyrical background, and pretty much all the lyrics by Till Lindemann have at least 2 layers and a certain ambiguity to them. But Mein Teil is directly inspired by this event that took place in 2001. Fact number 4. There is a distinct separation in the creative process behind most Rammstein songs. The guys in Rammstein actually follow a pretty strict work ethic, if I may say so. Even though Till is a pretty prominent element in the sound of Rammstein, he doesn't participate in the instrumental composing process. According to bassist Oliver Riedl, there are only a few exceptions to this rule. In other words, the instrumental section comes first and Till gets inspired by the instrumental section by the music itself, and he writes lyrics based upon, like, riffs and the general sound of the instruments. Paul Landers, one of the 2 guitarists in the band, has stated the following about this approach. Till kommt mit einem Text. Dieser basiert meistens auf dem Riff, das tragend für das Lied ist. Hartes Riff, harter Text. Weiches Riff, weicher Text. And fact number 5, a pretty interesting one if I may say so. Rammstein's musical style has to do with self-proclaimed limitations mentioned by the band members. Flake, the keyboard player, thinks, den Stil haben wir gefunden, indem wir alle genau wussten, was wir nicht wollten. Und wir wollten genau nicht amerikanische Funky-Musik machen oder Punk eben oder irgend sowas, was wir gar nicht können. Wir haben gemerkt, dass wir nur diese Musik können, die wir auch spielen. Und die ist halt mal sehr einfach, stumpf, monoton. So while I do get what Flake actually conveys with his statement, I still think that it's actually the mixture of the rather simplistic or simple music and more clever and complex lyrics that make, well, or that create actually a huge part of the fascination that is Rammstein, I'd personally say. Honestly, and I don't know about that, maybe you guys can tell me more about that yourself, probably not being native Germans or Germans in general. Maybe my point of view is a very German one, because for obvious reasons, most of us Germans do understand the lyrics right away, at least like the most obvious basic layer of them, and so we might have a different view on those. And of course, we also know very well how fellow Germans actually react and perceive certain things in life and what they think about certain things, and how they might in turn respond to some Rammstein lyrics. The long-term Swedish Rammstein producer Jakob Hellner actually pointed out something else, which I think is equally clever in terms of appealing to an international audience that, in doubt, might not even understand German at all. In the making of the album Reise Reise, which actually is my favorite Rammstein record, he says something along the lines of, "The lyrics, meaning the plain words and syllables in all the songs, should sound phonetically interesting and captivating anyway, pretty much, so that the singing also works for people that don't speak or understand German." So depending on your nationality and your knowledge in terms of languages, diving deeper into the lyrics might be a nice addition, pretty much the icing on the cake. On the German cake, of course. Haha. Hallo zusammen. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I watch certain movies, shows, and I listen to music, certain bands and stuff, I wonder, okay, what makes them them? What makes them great? To say it with Rick Beato, great channel by the way. What makes Rammstein work? What makes them them? How do they work as a band? So let's try to find that out today. I want to give my personal opinion, my personal reasons for them being as awesome as they are. Let's find that out. I think when one really tries to sum up several different potential reasons for why they could be so massively successful internationally, well, there's one thing that really comes to mind immediately, at least to me, which is their provocative nature, especially in early years. But what's that all about? While this might be the most obvious and simple reason why the project Rammstein has worked internationally despite them singing in German, some would also say because, it isn't wrong nonetheless. In my opinion, the band made some important stylistic decisions right from the get-go. Even though their style has also changed a little bit throughout the years, they didn't have to find their style on their first few albums. They had it right from 95's Härte onwards. The sonically basic instrumental approach paired with hooky, short, very expressive verbalizations of German words, in addition to creative music videos, a raw, heavy production, all that and more aspects instantly formed an already painted picture in people's minds. They didn't have to find out what the band is all about, they got it delivered right away. Clever but also risky choice, of course, because if that whole approach hadn't worked, if their whole idea and ideology, if that makes sense, wouldn't have worked, well, that would have been a big problem. Nowadays, as an internationally very successful established musical act, the band still has some provocative moments when it comes to lyrics, topics, and especially still their music videos, which are shot by a pool of usually recurring directors to keep a sort of distinctive visual Rammstein style. The amount of in-your-face provocation has decreased massively compared to their formative years though. That, of course, also has to do with shifting provocative and moral lines in society because of the internet, social media, and other socio-cultural aspects. And also, let's be honest, there aren't too many really big and universal taboo topics left. Pretty much everyone has seen, read, or at least heard about everything there is. That surely could have turned into a problem for the band in terms of branding, self-marketing, and the overall appearance. When I first listened to their latest self or untitled 2019 album, I was missing something indeed, and that definitely was a big provocative topic. Not because I really need that to enjoy their stuff, but rather because I was used to expect it from them. The album does have a few critical songs and topics, for instance Zeig dich, Show Yourself or Reveal Yourself, which is about child abuse in the Catholic Church, I think, and all that. But it's still fair to say that the album is the least provocative one the band has made to date. And I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily, quite the opposite. When you keep everything I've mentioned before in mind, I actually think, whether it was a conscious decision by Till or not, the album still works well despite of the lack in comparably shocking, surprising moments, and it might be beneficial to the band as well, since trying really hard and somewhat artificially maybe even, to find really provocative topics these days could easily turn into a never-ending endeavor, and so I'm glad that they didn't choose that path. Another big factor in the international success of Rammstein not only has to do with the choice of lyrical topics, but also in the really clever ways Till Lindemann knows how to deliver and express things. The true art of Rammstein songs lyrically is that most of them have really basic, simple, sing-along, hooky lyrics which seem extremely bland even, and obvious on the surface, and therefore accessible to many people, even when they just listen to the band in the background. However, at the same time, most of these songs and lyrics have at least two semantic layers to them. They are really ambiguous. Implementing ambiguities the way Till likes to do requires a contextual understanding of how the German language works, what expectations of listeners usually are like, and how to subtly play with them, how to surprisingly shift them around. Mostly this happens through the general semantics of words, their meaning, but Till even plays with some sonic ambiguities here and there, for instance in Du hast. Just by hearing the title without seeing it written out and all, you couldn't tell if it means you have or you hate in German. That sonic ambiguity works perfectly in the context of the song. More about that though in my video about this tune. To me, Till is a master in expressing things in a simple yet poetic and sophisticated way. His lyrics work in multiple ways, depending on the listener's perspective, his level of comprehension and experience. They are fascinating to young kids who might not know anything about the fairy tale influences of songs like Rosenrot and Dalai Lama, because Till sounds evil and mysterious when he sings, but also low, warm, captivating. People who not only understand but also comprehend what he's singing about can dive even deeper and, with a certain linguistic comprehension and contextual knowledge, enjoy the various subtle facets and details woven into verses, lines, phrases, sometimes even single words. But still, the question remains, what makes German songs work internationally? I mean, many people can't comprehend what they are about, so how did they do it? The long-term Swedish Rammstein producer Jakob Hellner really summed this up in the Reise making of. It's Till's general intonation, his tonal range, verbal stressing, and the overall expressive verbalization of mostly ordinary German words. Quite often, Till has a tendency to overstress certain letters and vowels, and in this case also an umlaut, the Ü in fühlen, in ich will. The way he sings it goes fühlen, even though it's fühlen in daily German. It's these little details, also the rolled R of course, which isn't part of his personal dialect at all by the way, when he really speaks colloquially and in daily Deutsch, daily German, but it really adds a uniqueness and also connects the dots in terms of their provocative nature, the metaphors in some of the songs, and of course also maybe the imagery that might come along with it. It might remind them of something like Nazis, the Third Reich, Hitler and whatnot. But if you really dive deeper into Rammstein songs, for instance Links 2, 3, 4, you quite quickly notice that they aren't what they seem to be, just and simply judging from the sound of Till when he sings. So don't get them wrong. Singing this expressively also stems from a common way of intonating German on a classic theater stage and opera. It's Bühnendeutsch, stage German, and also might just occur automatically since singing quite low can also result in that idiolect, a personal individual way of speaking, verbalizing things, for instance also in certain contexts. Another thing the band has really mastered, and I sort of admire them for that, is keeping a mystery to them. Yes, there is some private information on the band members that became public throughout the years, but compared to many other internationally acclaimed and popular acts, Rammstein as a whole, and especially Till Lindemann as the frontman, celebrate a quite healthy public life, private life balance, compared to many other people, honestly. Till and the whole band basically rarely give interviews, if any at all, which also adds up to him and the whole band being sort of mystified still. He can be the total opposite in being very, very expressive and drastic, even powerful on stage, but that's literally just his stage persona. People might criticize that approach because they might say, okay, well, that's fake, that's artificial, whatever, but I personally really think this is a smart and healthy move. Even given the possibility that he just might not want to give interviews because he's a rather shy person and doesn't want to be in the spotlight and the limelight all the time when he's not on stage performing, this still evokes respect in me and really keeps him being mystified to some degree. So, in the best sense of the word, Till Lindemann is a performer. In being that he and the whole band manages to be charismatic, enigmatic and drastic, and that's by and large the whole look of the band to many people, I guess. It's certainly also the seeming contradiction between serious, at least serious sounding lyrics and the band taking themselves not too seriously all the time, which becomes obvious when you watch making-ofs and behind-the-scenes material, for instance. Apart from the heavy sound, simple yet effective hooks, layered lyrics and Till's expressive singing style, their live shows are simply superb and unparalleled. Even if you don't like their music, there is still sort of a chance you will simply enjoy their show for what it is. Meaning, it could easily also work without their specific music, just as a complex, expensive show, a happening. Apart from maybe the first few shows in the mid-90s, the band has quickly picked up on a visually and impressive live show style. Of course, it's also beneficial that in the late 90s, Till officially became a pyrotechnician, so that he can also plan new effects and the like directly. It might be just a detail in the big Rammstein cosm, but having a band member who's directly involved and knows about those things and realizing these effects and all how that works, the production value, the whole show benefits from that in the end. So, summing all this up, and there are even more things I could talk about, Rammstein is more than just a band. I mean, just add the typical Rammstein R, the R, and it makes them what they truly are, in my opinion, a brand. That is a massive achievement which should never be underestimated. Yes, it's also part luck, coincidence, the right timing, the right place and all, but it's also hard work to see, to realize chances, to take them, to make something out of them and to keep them relevant and working, and even maintaining them throughout more or less absent years. So why do I personally love Rammstein? There are many reasons for that, and I can't really pinpoint that down to one single reason. And I don't think that is a bad thing necessarily. Quite the opposite, actually. I think that's a good thing, because it really shows how versatile this band is. But what do you think makes Rammstein as successful as they are? What are the potential reasons for that? Feel free to tell me in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, also don't forget to share it with other people, because that is the best way to support the channel. Thanks very much for doing that. Hallo zusammen! When you're watching this video, I think it's pretty safe to say that you're a Rammstein fan of any way, shape or form, I guess, and so am I. However, some of you might also have asked yourselves, okay, what is the origin of the Rammstein sound? Why do they sound the way they do? And that's the reason why in this video we're not gonna talk about Rammstein specifically, but more about another German band who's also become very successful in recent years. It's OOMPH. What do OOMPH have to do with Rammstein? And why is the band OOMPH important when it comes to the sound of Rammstein? Let's find that out. Every now and then, Rammstein keep naming OOMPH as one of their early and main influences, according to guitarist Flux in 2008. Rein von der Musikgeschichte her ist es so, dass wir uns vor 20 Jahren gegründet haben und Rammstein eben erst Mitte der 1990er Jahre. Die waren bei uns auf den Konzerten und haben ihre ersten Demos bei uns abgeliefert. Netterweise erwähnen sie uns in Interviews auch immer wieder als Einflüsse und Inspirationsquellen. The German NDH metal band OOMPH was founded in Wolfsburg, literally translated Wolf's Castle, a pretty rad name for a German town if you ask me, in 1989, meaning about 5 years prior to Rammstein. It's also a pretty well-known German town which is widely associated with the popular German car manufacturer VW, VW in German. Ever since their formation, OOMPH has been and still is a 3-piece rock or metal band with additional live musicians completing their sound. In the early 1990s, they basically became the fathers of the NDH genre, the Neue Deutsche Härte, the new German heaviness or harshness, and in fact many music critics referred to them as a key element in forming this subgenre back then. Singer De Rogoy not only sings and usually writes the band's lyrics, he also plays drums on studio recordings, which is an instrumental combination he also shares with, well, you might have guessed it already, Till Lindemann of Rammstein, because in fact he also played drums in the pre-Rammstein rock band First Arsch, First S. The other two band members are Crab. No, not what you think, that's his stage name. And Flux, not Flux, who both play guitar, respectively bass guitar. As of 2019, the band has released 13 studio albums, with the first few albums featuring English songs and the vast majority of later songs being in German. Their very first self-titled album was released in 1992, and it was still very much an EBM album, electronic body music that is, compared to later records. And even though their first single, Ich bin du, I am you, was a little international hit already, it was in the US top 10 independent charts around 1992 and 1993, it was only with the release of their second record, Sperm, released in 1994, that they were and are widely considered as the German band that laid the foundations of a subgenre as a whole. On this more or less crossover-like album, they included several influences from the likes of Pantera or Sepultura. Talking about this time frame, we're also talking about a, back then, still quite fresh and innovative approach to rock and metal music with electronic sounds that would later be categorized under the name of Neue Deutsche Härte. And even though Rammstein certainly are the most well-known international band belonging to that genre, OOMPH have been doing pretty well in both Germany and other countries for many years too, and especially so since their general breakthrough album Wahrheit oder Pflicht from 2004. This and their follow-up success has also led to the band re-recording their most popular tunes for the English compilation album Truth or Dare in 2010. The title is a direct equivalent to Wahrheit oder Pflicht in English, yet this compilation album features re-recorded English versions of songs from various different OOMPH albums. So it's not a one-on-one English version of that 2004 album I just mentioned. And honestly, when I think of OOMPH and had to name my favorite album by them, I'd probably also name that just mentioned 8th album Wahrheit oder Pflicht from 2004. This album features their most popular song to date, respectively their breakthrough single, which is also the first OOMPH track I've ever heard and listened to, Augen auf. The title Augen auf can get translated to Eyes Open, but in the context of the song, it rather refers to the children's game Hide and Seek and the reference Augen auf, ich komme, ready or not, I'm coming. Interestingly enough, similar to Sonne by Rammstein, counting up to 10 is a key factor in this track. Because here, a boy counts to 10 in German and underlines the Augen auf reference. In hindsight and from my own experience, the song was so successful and got massive airplay on both German radio and music TV, it also seemed to appeal to people in my family or to family friends who normally aren't that much into rock and metal for the most part. Another really good tune from that era, which has become an OOMPH classic, is the collaboration Brennende Liebe, Burning Love, with the Austrian electro-rock band L'Âme Immortelle, which mainly consists of Thomas Reiner and Sonja Kraushofer. This song has a very dense mood to it, and the impressive music video, which reminds me of the whole Frankenstein storyline, really accompanies the track very well. Here, Sonja Kraushofer shares singing duties with Dero in a haunting way. Another clear recommendation from my part. And as a side note, the 2004 L'Âme Immortelle album Gezeiten, Tides, is an interesting musical experience too. Good examples would be the rather light and echoey type, ambient-like title track Gezeiten and the single 5 Jahre, 5 years. They also have quite a couple of songs in English. At the age of 13, back in 2004, when Augen auf was released as a single, I was both astonished by the music and also the pretty cool and atmospheric music video, which I highly recommend watching as well. I basically bought the album right away and have listened to OOMPH on and off ever since. That leads me to another aspect I've always enjoyed about OOMPH, which is their production and production quality. Even though usually their songs aren't overly complex when it comes to the arrangements, Their sound is really thick, really powerful, and really energetic. And especially on this album you can hear a thick wall of sound, a thick wall of guitars in that sense. And, well, pounding drums as well. So that really works in favor of the energetic expression in the songs and how they actually, well, burst into your ears. I especially like their 2 direct follow-up releases, Glaube, Liebe, Tod, Faith, Love, Death, and Monster, Monster 2. For instance, one of my favorite tracks on Glaube, Liebe, Tod and also a single is Die Schlinge, The News, which, by the way, they recorded with Apocalyptica. The deep and also tempting kind of vocals by singer Dero really fit well with the overall heavy sound. Depending on the context, he can sing in both a vulnerable and also a more powerful, harsh way. In direct comparison to Till Lindemann from Rammstein, Dero Goy from OOMPH rather tends to lean towards a more, well, vibrato-oriented style, without sounding overly classical though. He doesn't roll the R, but he is equally expressive in terms of style and also the lyrics, I'd say. Last but not least, I'd like to point out a few other similarities and differences between OOMPH and Rammstein that might be interesting to know. For instance, both bands have a direct or indirect connection to the German punk cult figure Nina Hagen. The Finnish cello rock band Apocalyptica recorded a cover of Rammstein's Seemann, Sailor, with her, for instance, and also a David Bowie cover of Heroes with Till Lindemann in German, by the way. And OOMPH have recorded their popular single Das Fieber, The Fever, as a duet with her. Both bands have also recorded songs in English, although when it comes to Rammstein that's rather a rarity, with the exception of parts in Pussy or the Depeche Mode cover Stripped. Both bands' lyrics are pretty ambiguous for the most part and deal with several different topics from political hints, love, religious themes or what we Germans refer to as die Gesellschaftskritik, the social criticism. Both bands have had at least one #1 album in Germany. The first one for Rammstein was Sehnsucht in 1997 and the first one for OOMPH actually was their new one, Ritual. As of early May in 2019, OOMPH have recorded nearly twice as many studio albums as Rammstein have, and I don't say that in a judgmental way whatsoever. And with the release of the new self-titled Rammstein album on May 17th in 2019, both bands will have a song titled Sex in their repertoire. As I've mentioned, OOMPH released their latest studio effort Ritual, Das Ritual, The Ritual, in January of 2019. It's once again heavier than their 2 previous albums, I'd say. Apart from the already mentioned albums, I'd recommend giving the best of compilation Delikatessen from 2006 a spin or 2. So can or should OOMPH be considered a Rammstein sound-alike? No, definitely not. Even though you can hear similarities in the sound design and the structures of things, you can still hear many differences, especially in the singing, for instance. Even though both sing rather low, they have distinct voices that really differ from each other. And in general, I'd say OOMPH and Rammstein really complement each other musically, so that really fits. Hallo zusammen! Today I, a German who's making videos about the German language and culture here on YouTube, want to try to answer recurring common questions about the band Rammstein that were asked on Google. I don't know the questions yet, I don't know if I can answer all of them, but I'm gonna try my very best, at least. Alright, so let's begin with the why questions. Warum? Why are Rammstein comments disabled? Well, you might have noticed that as well. When you try to watch a Rammstein music video on YouTube, there are no comments, and you can't actually write a comment down there because the comment section is empty. It's disabled. I guess it wasn't disabled by the band themselves, but rather by the band's management. We still have to remember it's a band. They are not YouTubers directly, like content creators per se. So it's a bit different for them, and it's not their only source of income, of course, but it's still, well, an interesting step to take, not without risk when it comes to like the algorithm and how it works, you know, many factors that play into that, all of that, and the traffic on YouTube, how your channel is evaluated by the system. Of course, I don't really know the answer to this one in specific, but I have some assumptions. The nature of many Rammstein lyrical topics that is, can be quite delicate, so I could see fit that they said, okay, you know what, comments that we've seen in the past were kind of, you know, on the edge of being rather rude and maybe even leaning towards hate speech. If what I just said might be one of the reasons why they decided to do that, I can see fit why they did. Why are Rammstein so popular? I tried to make a video about that before, and I think there are multiple reasons. They are more than just a band, they are a brand, which means their marketing and their self-promotion, so to speak, those skills are really, really well developed. Their marketing team does a really great job, not only when it comes to, promoting merchandise and using Ich will, like little claims that everyone knows and can relate to from songs and from lyrics, not just the music, not just the lyrics, and not just the way Till sings. Of course, that is also a big factor in everything. The logo and the whole aesthetic of the band is so recognizable. Recognizability, I think that is one of the biggest and most important factors when it comes to Rammstein's success. You can make the best music in the world, and I'm not saying Rammstein isn't doing that. It's not overly complex, and it doesn't have to be. It's great for what it is. It has a pop sensitivity, but in the best sense of the word. Like, it's metal, but with catchy melodies, with an interesting singing style, and of course also this Teutonic flavor that's in there as well. So there are many aspects when it comes to that, and that is what I mean when I say Rammstein are more than just a band, they are a brand. The live shows, I guess there are people that just go to the live shows even if they don't like the band or their music, and that is something that sounds easy and, obvious maybe even, but it's pretty tough to achieve all of that and to maintain that status as well. Why are Rammstein tickets so expensive? You have to keep in mind that it's not just like the band is touring, flying from A to B and that's it, and then they perform and, that's the whole thing. Not at all. You have to keep in mind Rammstein, once again, is more than just a band. It's not only a brand, but it's also an employer for many people that work for Rammstein and for their live shows. Many people that travel with them across the world, across the globe. They have to be paid, they have their salaries and stuff, pyrotechnics, little gimmicks and, stage performing toys that they use. For instance, like this penis pistol. It's an event, it's not just a concert. All that comes into play here, and that is why I personally wouldn't say their tickets are expensive in the sense of, they cost more than they should. Those tickets are rather pricey, but for good reasons. Why are Rammstein called Rammstein? There are many different versions of the origin of that band name. There is a military base called Rammstein with just one instead of 2M. And back in 1988, there was an air show going on. And during that air show, there was a big, massive accident. And I believe in the very early days of the band, they were even called Rammstein Flugschau, which pretty much means Rammstein Air Show, flight show. And maybe they didn't know that the town Rammstein is just spelled with one M instead of two, and there is the German term rammen, to ram. Maybe that is why they chose 2M, or maybe they did it on purpose in order to not to be confused with that necessarily, even though they might have been inspired by that accident and that town, that military air base. If you want to learn more about the pronunciation of Rammstein and all the different facets of that term, what it means, it's a compound word actually, feel free to watch my video about just that. You can find it in the end card, and of course many other Rammstein videos that I've done throughout the years by now. English translations and explanations of the German lyrics for learners of the German language and much more. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check out the playlist in the end card. Let's continue with do Rammstein questions. Do Rammstein speak English? Yes, they do. Some more fluently and better, and some, from what I've heard in interviews, I think Flake isn't really as fluent when it comes to speaking English. That's not meant to mock him in any way, shape or form or to criticize him. Don't get me wrong, I'm just stating that. Richard Kruspe, the guitarist, might be the most fluent one when it comes to speaking English, because he also lives in New York, if I'm not mistaken, and he also has his second band, Emigrate. To me, I think Till rather has a tendency towards, being interested in Russia a little bit more. Could just be me, I don't know. Heard him speaking English as well. But yeah, and the other guys, I'm not too sure, but I think they can actually speak English as well. Quite okay, you know, the typical German way of speaking English. By the way, fun fact for you guys, when Germans learn English in school, it's usually almost always pretty much British English. They don't learn American English. So when you hear Germans speak English and they sort of use, you know, British pronunciations and verbalizations of certain words, dancing instead of dancing and all that kind of stuff, that's for a reason, because usually we learn British English in school. Are Rammstein good? No. They are great. Hallo zusammen. Of course, a band like Rammstein is more than the sum of its parts. But, of course, the several different parts make the band sound. If one member were to change, or if one member were substituted, the sound would change. And that's why today I want to focus on Richard Kruspe, one of the two guitarists in the band, his upbringing in the former GDR, and how he found his way into the metal scene and into Rammstein, essentially. So, let's find out. You may have noticed me pronouncing the name maybe quite differently to what you are used to saying. The German verbalization of this name is Richard, with a light sounding ch, Richard. Z, das Z, the letter Z or Z, and Kruspe, which always sort of reminds me of the German noun die Kruste, singular. Die Krusten, plural, even though it doesn't have anything to do with that, but you know, Richard Z. Krust. Almost sounds like a character out of SpongeBob. To be precise though, you'd actually have to call him Sven, with a pretty sharp S at the beginning. Sven, because actually that's his real birth name. Sven Kruspe was born on June 24th, 1967 in the small town Wittenberge in the state of Brandenburg, which back then was part of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, aka Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the official German name abbreviated DDR, DDR, also colloquially known as East Germany in English. The socialist communist state existed from 1949 until 1990, when both Germanies, West and East, reunited to the Germany we know today. If you want to find out more about this, you can watch my video on October the 3rd, which is Germany's national holiday, the former two Germanys, East and West, and the German reunification. You can find a link to that video in the end card. Up until the age of 12, Richard had a quite peaceful, normal childhood. While he was still living in Wittenberge, he enjoyed wrestling in a town's club, but also became increasingly interested in music. When he became a teen, and he increasingly reflected on the way his life was organized back then, his life changed. A big part of that was die Scheidung, the divorce of his parents, which eventually led to the family moving to Schwerin in northern Germany, which was still part of the GDR. You have to keep in mind that back in the day, as an ordinary GDR citizen, you couldn't just leave the GDR like that, you know, it wasn't possible. However, he didn't really get along too well with his Stiefvater, the stepfather, which also increased his urge to rebel against his own life back then. Another good example of his growing rebellious, more individualist behavior, some, including himself, may even call it naive, and sorglos, carefree, can be found in something which sounds totally normal from today's point of view, but back then it simply wasn't. In the GDR, musicians had to have a so-called Spielerlaubnis, an admission to play music, in order to be allowed to play music publicly. One of the reasons for this was that the GDR regime didn't want musicians to sing against the core values of the communist state, let alone evoke a riot or misinfluence the youth in that regard. Richard neglected those regulations and played punk rock music without that permission. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't be punk rock, I guess. Another factor that may as well have contributed to his quite rebellious attitude is the fact that Sven, aka Richard, was born as the second child into family Kruspe, which in consequence also gave Richard the freedom to follow his own interests even more. So in order to basically separate himself from the good brother, he sort of became the bad brother. As a consequence, his parents often gave him der Stubenarrest, meaning he had to stay at home. It's also known as der Hausarrest, the house arrest, so to speak, quite literally actually. And sitting in his small room, His only way to mentally escape the situation and life in the GDR was listening to foreign rock or metal music, classic bands of the era, such as Black Sabbath or AC/DC. In some way, you may even be able to argue that these situations have contributed to his intrinsic will to play music, see the world, leave the GDR behind. In a way, without him having been born second and the GDR life may have led him to pursue a different career all along, who knows? It's an interesting thought though, which by no means of course is supposed to downplay the dictatorship of the GDR, of course. As he got older, he worked as der Koch, the chef. And next to that, he also created jewelry, which wasn't really allowed back then though. Through a spy, the Stasi, die Staatssicherheit, the GDR regime police, got word of it and told Richard that either he would basically have to join them or else he had to go to jail. Hooray. Richard was given 1 week of deliberation and of course he wasn't allowed to tell anybody since he could technically have ended up working as a spy. But because he told pretty much every friend he knew, he actually tricked the Stasi and got away with it. Lucky bastard. He later mentioned that he never found out which of his friends actually spied on him, but he wasn't particularly interested in finding out anyway. During his childhood, he really loved to play the guitar and increasingly became better at it. And one of his first bands he played in from 1987 to 1989 was actually called Das elegante Chaos, the Elegant Chaos. In October of 1989, the 22-year-old Richard indeed saw no other way than fleeing, escaping the communist regime in order to live an unconstrained life as a musician. He eventually managed to flee to West Germany, but because of the wall and the strict and even life-threatening measures guards would use or take against GDR citizens who wanted to escape the GDR and get behind the wall, many were even shot to death there. He first traveled to the Czech Republic, then to Hungary, and then he found a way to emigrate from the GDR to West Germany. See what I did there? I guess you could argue that his first emigration was as much of an influence on his solo band name that is, as his second one to New York. When the wall had come down in 1989 and the GDR had ceased to exist in 1990, he returned to Schwerin, former GDR territory, and continued to play in a band called Das Auge Gottes, the Eye of God. At that time, in the early 90s, he also got to know someone called Till Lindemann, who was playing drums in the band First Arsch, First Ass. Interesting band name. They were looking for a new guitarist and, long story short, Richard eventually joined the group. From 1991 onwards, he also played in the band Die Firma, The Company, and that's when he also got to know their drummer Christoph Schneider. Now a part of the music scene in the reunited Germany, he got to know fellow musicians easier than it may have been possible in the GDR, also because of the aforementioned required Spielerlaubnis. Back in GDR days, sitting in his room, music was one of the only ways Richard Kruspe could get an impression on the rest of the world behind the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain. He had the chance to listen to US-American rock and metal, which he fell in love with, so he wanted to experience that music live, and now he actually had the chance to experience that music live with his own eyes and ears for the first time. So in the early 90s, he, his new friend Till Lindemann, and a certain bass player of the befriended tongue-twister-like band The Instructables, Oliver Riedel, traveled to the USA for the first time. Probably also their first official vacation outside of East Germany or Europe. At the time, Richard Kruspe was playing in a crossover band with the iconic name Orgasm Death Gimmick, up until 1993. But longing for a new musical outlet, he and his, by then, roommates Oliver Riedel and Christoph Schneider joined forces with Till Lindemann and founded a new band. No, not Rammstein yet, but Temple Prayers, which is a pretty cool name. A huge early influence in their style was Pantera, for instance. And interestingly enough, even though Paul Landers and Christoph Schneider already knew each other by then, because of their former band Feeling B, Landers wasn't part of the Temple Prayers at first. After a pretty successful participation in a Berlin-based music context, the 4-piece became a 5-piece, with the addition of Paul Landers and, later on also, sort of, with Christian Lorenz, also known as Flake, and on January the 1st, 1994, the band Rammstein was born. At first, the guest keyboard player Christian Lorenz, who was formerly playing in Feeling B as well, wasn't the biggest fan of the band's style, but since he knew the guys, he would do them a favor and play music with them for a while. And I guess it was still much fun for him. One of his ideas was to have German lyrics. So, in a way, in hindsight, Christian Lorenz, aka Flake, basically laid a massive foundation in terms of the band's further success and popularity worldwide, despite, or maybe because, of the German lyrics. Dark vocals, heavy riffs, keyboard licks, and steady drum grooves. All of which is an integral part of the music of Rammstein. Hallo zusammen! Welcome to the second episode of Rammstein Google Questions answered by a German, and we're gonna look at more questions asked about the band and the band members, why they do certain things, why they are a certain way, and yeah, and more. Do Rammstein ever sing in English? Yes, for instance, the phenomenal Depeche Mode cover Stripped is in English because the original song is in English. Even though Till actually said that in the making of the music video and, you know, talking about that and how that came to be, how that came about, he wasn't able to sing the original chorus, "Let me see you stripped down to the bone," like a complete phrase in a certain, you know, singing manner. That is why they actually stuck with "Let me see you stripped" without "down to the bone." And of course Pussy, which, you know, the lyrics are really cool and funny, but musically it's not my favorite song by them, gotta be honest. It's a Denglish song, basically. In German, the term Denglish means a mixture of Deutsch and English, hence Denglish, German and English. You know, of course, me being a German, I love their German songs, but I also like when they do sort of fan service, if that makes sense, when they actually perform a song in Spanish, Te quiero puta, for instance. Do Rammstein hate each other? Just think about the band, how long they've been active, you know, and just think about the fact that they actually didn't change a single band member. I think that speaks for itself. I truly believe that you can only be so successful and so invested in your art when you really enjoy playing in a band and playing with those people. And we also have to keep in mind a band is more than just musicians. It's pretty much a bond between friends, or even, you know, some musicians actually say a band is really like a family. Do Rammstein hate America? I guess that is pretty much based on the song Amerika. They criticize a certain cultural attitude, an Americanization of the world, and imperialism. It's been the case with Germany as well. I mean, you know, we're drinking Coca-Cola and we're using other American products. We're using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All those companies are American, and that is not meant in a negative way. It's just stating the obvious. I think in that song they primarily highlight those cultural changes and, you know, influences that are there. They surely don't hate America, otherwise they wouldn't perform there. I mean, you know, just think about that. So if I had to give a clear answer to this question, I would definitely say no. But that doesn't mean that they aren't criticizing things or highlighting certain aspects and certain influences. Are Rammstein concerts safe? I haven't been to a Rammstein concert yet, so I can't say for sure. It's one of the, you know, big musical dreams that I still have, to see Rammstein live at some point. Couldn't manage to get tickets yet, so maybe at some point. But from what I've heard, their concerts are pretty safe and they really take care of that. Also because, you know, Till is a pyrotechnician. He actually got his pyrotechnical license back in the late 90s, I think, 97, 98, around that time when the band really blew up. So it's not just the concert management and the event managers, but also the band themselves that really make sure that everyone's safe. Are Rammstein fascists? No. But that's the thing, they play with those Teutonic, sort of Third Reich-like cliches here and there. And also, of course, the harsh singing style might remind you of that, but they aren't. Are Rammstein Nazis? Not at all. And also keep in mind their manager, Emanuel Fialik, he is black, you know, and are Rammstein popular in Germany? Yes, they are, but to a lesser extent compared to other countries and parts of the world, which might sound ironic. And to some degree it is, but it's the same with the Scorpions, for instance. There are many Germans that really dislike popular German bands, musicians that are really popular internationally. I don't know why that is for sure. I think there are many reasons for that phenomenon. There are definitely Germans that really hate Rammstein and other successful German artists in the world. And I think that's stupid. Are Rammstein still together? Yes, they are. And if I'm not mistaken, they are still in the studio recording their new album, which might be out later this year, maybe, or maybe next year. I can't wait. What do Rammstein sing about? There are many different recurring topics in Rammstein songs, including, of course, the obvious things, love, but also quite the opposite. Mostly their lyrics don't have a particular single influence, I don't think, but there are songs that are influenced by real life events. For instance, Mein Teil or Wiener Blut. In those cases, it would be crimes as an influence, There are many different things. They also have very fairy tale-like songs and lyrics, Rosenrot, for instance, or Du riechst so gut. And that also is not just highlighted in the topics, but also in the stylistic choices of words, outdated old German terms, to really stress that fairy tale-like atmosphere. They also sing about religion in a mostly critical sense, Zeig dich, for instance. Sometimes they even have more or less political songs, Links 2, 3, 4. Songs can even be hilarious, sexual, something like Pussy. That is, Steck Bratwurst in dein Sauerkraut. Sticking bratwurst in your sauerkraut. You get it, I think. What do Rammstein songs mean and what do Rammstein lyrics mean? Well, just watch my videos and you'll get your answers there. This might be one of my favorites. What would Rammstein do? What would Rammstein do? What they want. Ever since their formation, they have done what they wanted to do, and they didn't think about whether they could do something or whether it's socially okay to do something or not. They just do it for the art. So that is what they would do.
What they want.
When will Rammstein release a new album? Hopefully sooner than later. I really don't want to have a 10-year break in between albums again. I mean, there was that best of thing made in Germany. My guess would be 2022. And hopefully, when they can tour again, and when they will have new concerts scheduled in Germany, I might finally be able to see them live. What is Rammstein in English? So a very short and basic answer would be Ram stone. Pretty much a stone like a pillar in order to secure and protect buildings from cars driving into them. That to me is what a Rammstein is all about. I think that's pretty much a literal answer to that question, but there's much more to that, of course. I've made a video about that, by the way. Just saying. Hallo zusammen. It finally happened. Years in the making, so to speak. I got to see Rammstein live. So here's what I, a longtime German fan, think of the show and how much I enjoyed it, if at all. I became an active Rammstein fan in 2004 with the release of the Reise singles Amerika, Keine Lust and Mein Teil. For years and years, more or less ever since, I tried to get Rammstein tickets, but somehow luck had never been on my side with this endeavor. It was not much of a difference in 2020 when Rammstein sold tickets for their European tour in support of their self- or untitled comeback album, which was released in 2019. You know, to me, Rammstein is more than just one of my favorite bands. They are also a huge part of this channel and this community. Through my videos and me talking about the German lyrics, what makes them special and the like, many fellow-minded fans have gotten in touch and discussed the songs under my videos, you know, in the comment section. So it was and is something that's really special. Fast forward 2 years and a pandemic later, the shows that were originally booked for 2020 couldn't take place in 2021, and therefore they got rescheduled a second time. In May of 2022, I was at my parents' and scrolled through Instagram. All of a sudden, I read something to the effect of, "More production limits have been lifted so we can offer additional tickets." And I immediately told my dad, because it's sort of a ritual for us to go to concerts together regularly. I mean, this year alone, we've seen Ghost, Tool, Die Ärzte, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers so far, and there's even more to follow. When I told him the ticket price, he was like, that's a bit costly. Then I texted my mom, who was sitting right across from me, and eventually we both decided to buy 2 tickets nonetheless. One for him being a gift, and one for me. His 60th birthday was in June, so that actually worked out in our favor. So, on June 18th, my dad's 60th birthday, we gave him his ticket and he was really surprised. Also, because the concert in question was about to take place just one day later, on Sunday, June 19th, in Düsseldorf. And on that day, we drove to the venue, the Merkur Spielarena in Düsseldorf. It was a sunny, warm, but not too warm day. More about that in the German podcast, episode 72, by the way, which is available on all common podcast apps and platforms. It's a German podcast, hence the name, but for both native speakers and for language learners. As you can see, we had tickets up there on the sides of the arena, but we couldn't care less, to be honest, because we just wanted to be there. And you have to keep in mind that the tickets we got were additionally offered tickets, so both of us were far from complaining in any way. Anyway. We still very much felt the heat of the flames. We literally oversaw everything, with the exception of drummer Christoph Schneider, because the angle didn't allow for that. However, we still got to see him on a huge screen that was attached to the side of the huge stage. So that was a pretty well thought out technical solution. When you think of a Rammstein show and you've never been to one, you may guess they're gonna use pyrotechnics on every song, all the time. I was surprised that the band doesn't use the huge upper fire installments more often, for instance, the fire towers. They are placed in the back of the infield. The more the show progressed and I thought about it, you know what, I actually really prefer them not using all that stuff for every single song, because then it's very easy to be pretentious and monotonous, you know? It won't stay something special and outstanding. In other words, the fact they didn't use pyrotechnics all the time made the times they used pyrotechnics even more impactful and unique. We were really pleasantly surprised with the sound as well. The live mix was well balanced and the bass wasn't drowning everything else too much, which often occurs in heavier, distorted live music. Don't get me wrong, it was freaking loud, but it never got to the point of being very distorted or too loud, I don't think. Generally speaking, when it comes to loud live music, I can't stress enough how important it is to wear ear protection. Not just for really loud shows like this one, your ears will certainly thank you later in life, believe me. And you can thank me later as well. So, which songs did they play? Well, setlist spoiler incoming. The setlist contained many of the band's expected classics. I was pleasantly surprised to hear Armee der Tristen, which opened the show including a loud bang. They neither played Angst nor Dicke Titten, and they didn't play Feuer frei. Asche zu Asche would have been nice as well, but Rammstein, the song, and Heirate mich were equally cool old school tracks. Also, two standout live performances and songs were Du hast and Sonne, both with highly impressive and literally heartwarming technical effects, if you know what I mean. And if you're asking yourselves if my dad also enjoyed the show, well, I think this picture says it all, doesn't it?
Wie fandst du das Konzert denn?
Hervorragend.
Ja?
Ja.
So?
Mach ich wieder.
Ja?
And on this occasion, I would like to thank all you guys who have watched one or even all of my 70 plus Rammstein-related German language learning and explanation videos. Your feedback, your interest in them, is really beyond amazing to me, and I can't stress how blessed I feel with an awesome community like you guys. So from the bottom of my German heart, thank you very much, and let's drive the road together to 100k subscribers. Shall we? I think we shall. Thanks for watching everyone, I'm your Vlog Dave, tschüss und bis zum nächsten Mal.